The decision was momentous. It would publicly have the church defend the Jews. So he did make a decision. He began his papacy in early 39 by burying this document. It is now known to historians as the hidden Encyclical. And the French guards tried to block her gaining entrance into the camp. She forced her way past them. She refused to leave without the children. She remains in the camp for the next few days, badgering the guards until the director of the French Red Cross came and negotiated with the French officials to let the children leave. They were let go a few hours before they would have been shipped to Auschwitz, because the Vatican stalled for 10 months, at which point the Commission simply gave up and suspended its work. The Vatican responded by accusing the Jewish members of the Commission of conducting a defamatory campaign against the Church. The International Red Cross makes it a practice to send all of its records to the headquarters in Geneva as soon as practical after each case is closed, making it impossible for the investigation to continue along those lines here. It is the opinion of this writer that an examination of those records in Geneva of all passports issued by the International Red Cross would reveal startling and unbelievable facts. Then Rabbi Herzog raised his head and looked at the young men gathered before him, and he said, "I cannot save those thousands of Jewish children, but I ask of you, how are you going to help rebuild the Jewish people?"
Welcome to History for the Curious. I'm Menno Reisner, and I host the internationally renowned lecturer, dynamic historian and tour guide, Rabbi Aubrey Hirsch. Experience our history, confront dilemmas, and reveal the untold stories of 3,000 years of Jewish heritage, from Paris to Cairo, from the Russian Tsar to Maimonides, and from the Sinai Revelation to the French Revolution. Join the fastest growing Jewish history podcast in the world by subscribing to this channel and discovering the events that have shaped us into who we are today. Rabbi Hirsch, gute Woche. Welcome back to the second part of our series on the Church and Germany. This week we'll be looking at the immediate years after World War II. We've had quite a few emails, saying, well, do you know that this happened after the war? We'll be addressing them all today. This podcast is being sponsored by Nishmas Joel Breslauer, Yehuda ben Shmuel HaKohen. And just to add that tomorrow Mitzvah will be releasing yet another podcast. This one is specially for Tisha B'Av and is the incredible story of a survivor who was in hiding for many months and whom we actually spoke with on a Zoom meeting on Friday. So, Rabbi Hirsch, part 2.
We're going to focus on 4 areas that happened in the years immediately following the war, each of which reveals progressively a complicity and a deficient moral map. We're going to start with the reaction of the Church to the Nazi defeat and the Allied victory and the remaining Jewish presence in Europe. Now, there needed to be some backpedaling in Germany as a whole, because Germany pre-war represented human accomplishment in arts, science, Nobel Prize winners, and therefore it was sort of hard to imagine that good Germans and people whose Christian identity seemed above board, that they wouldn't have condemned the Nazi state as a criminal regime. So what happens is that almost immediately, all Germans are portrayed as victims, and boy, how they suffered. And the Church went on the offensive. In terms of their own conduct regarding the Jews, they adopted various lines of defence, some of which are contradictory. Firstly, they denied knowledge of what was happening to the Jews.
You mentioned last week that they refused to even open the archives, right?
Yes, for 75 years they were inaccessible, including some of the stuff I read out last week, and therefore in the 1950s, for instance, there is no way to assess the truth of what they knew. Then they said that actually the Pope did intervene repeatedly, and he saved Jews. And if you think this wouldn't hold water for a moment, bear in mind that in 2005, so that's 60 years later, a book is printed called How Pius XII and the Catholic Church Saved 500,000 Jews from the Nazis. I mean, 500,000, these numbers are staggering because that is more than the 1939 total of Jews of Germany, Belgium, Holland and Austria combined, which means not only distorting the truth, but in ways that beggar belief. And this is one of many books. Then, in 1963, there's a play called The Deputy, which portrays the Pope as somebody who willingly turned a blind eye to the Holocaust. And it is staged despite church protests, as you can imagine, in Europe, in North America. And the Vatican responded by putting pressure on the Italian government so that the play was banned in Italy. And then Montini, who was the future Pope Paul VI, he writes that the wartime Pope had in fact spared no effort to prevent the horrors of mass deportation, and that, and I quote, "History will vindicate the conduct of Pius XII and will show how vigilant and courageous his actions had been."
He didn't give any details, did he?
Now, strangely, he didn't mention what exactly those courageous actions during the war had been. Then, to add insult to injury, the Catholic Church decided to formally start the process of canonizing Pius XII, meaning he would be made into Saint Pius XII. And of course, there were questions about his war record, so the Vatican announced in October 1999 the creation of a commission. 3 Catholic and 3 Jewish historians would investigate the Pope's conduct during the Holocaust. The 6 members requested access to the archives and asked 47 questions. Now, it was therefore pretty obvious from then on that the unseen material would be very damaging because the Vatican stalled for 10 months, at which point the commission simply gave up and suspended its work. The Vatican responded by accusing the Jewish members of the Commission of conducting a defamatory campaign against the Church. And the Jesuit Father Gumpel, who was the Church's official public advocate for furthering Pius XII's canonization, accused the Jews in general of being massive accomplices in the destruction of the Catholic Church, just as Jews were the managers of communism. And then declared on CBS News to millions of people, "It is a fact that the Jews have killed Christ. This is an undeniable historical fact." Yup. Now, I have to add that one of the Church's requirements for sainthood is having performed a miracle, and I now have a ready-made miracle for him, because he saved 500,000 Jews while being unaware that anything was actually happening to them. That is surely a miracle. Even more starkly, in Croatia, priests themselves committed mass murder, including as the commanders of approximately half of the 20 death camps in the Ustasha regime. Dozens, perhaps even hundreds of priests shared in the sacred work of killing. Pius XII neither criticised nor disciplined any of these Croatian priest executioners after the war. So, we now move to the next line of defence from the Vatican. The Jesuit scholar Pierre Blett, one of the most sophisticated defenders of Pius XII, offered an explanation for his silence, one that many have embraced. The Pope's decision was based firstly on his belief that protests gain nothing and they can harm those who one hopes to assist. And secondly, Pius XII had to consider that a public statement would have presented the Pope as an enemy of Germany, which could unsettle the faithful and risk losing their allegiance to the Catholic Church.